first time after 9/11.
We have stopped in front of the picture of President Bush throwing out that first pitch before Game 3 of the World Series. Of all the things that happened in those months, I think that is the one that stays with me the most.
The president coming out and going through this ritual that any baseball fan understands, it gives you a sense that things can be okay.
The exhibit finishes on November 4th, which is a remarkable day. In the morning, New York City put on the marathon. And that night, the Yankees and Diamondbacks play one of the most famous baseball games of all time, where the Diamondbacks win Game 7 of the World Series.
What is more expressive of the recovery of New York, the resilience of New York, the resistance of New York, to say, we're 2 million people, we're going to go into the streets of our city, we're going to cheer on these 30,000 runners who come from around the world, they're not just our neighbors. It was this catharsis for the city.
I love this exhibit for 2 separate groups of people. For those of us who love sports, who are old enough to remember it, it brings back memories that are so powerful. And for a generation like my children, who did not live through 9/11, to understand the incredible significance that sports can play, that's what this exhibit is about. Now, the following day, on the 12th, we all awoke in a world that had forever been changed as the magnitude of what had happened began to sink in. And on that morning, just outside the city in Hempstead, New York, the Jets, who had lost their opener 3 days before at home against the Colts, were preparing to take the field for practice.
The National Football League says it is mulling over whether to postpone this weekend's schedule.
The best thing is for us to figure out what we're going to do. Keep people in limbo. I think that's the worst thing you can do is feel like, we're going to do it, we're not going to do it, and that's how I feel.
Wednesday we came back to practice, a very quiet, very somber practice. You can see the guys weren't focused. You're always in the back of your mind thinking about what happened, could it happen again?
Within 30 minutes, I can see there is no life in this practice. It shouldn't be. I got a little concerned. So I called the team up. I said, okay, let's go back in. I said, I don't know how you guys are feeling. I have no idea. I said, but I know how I'm feeling. And I don't feel like going to this football game.
People in this locker room have neighbors who are missing. Our children's friends at school don't have dads, moms anymore. And we have to deal with that on a personal level. Whether or not the league makes its player now, it's up to them. But I think as far as this locker room is concerned, it's going to be a tough thing to do if they make us play.
So if you guys have a voice, if you don't want to play this week, we won't play. We won't get on the airplane, we won't go. And we'll forfeit the game, and we'll be 0-2. And I'm okay with that. But you guys decide.
We're getting ready to go out to play the Raiders. I actually went in to talk to our head coach. Told him that I didn't have it in me
house together even closer. It was an effort by a bunch of coaches, a bunch of players that decided, you know, something bigger than playing football with people.
Being a native New Yorker, deep down in my heart, I know it was the right decision not to play this weekend.
The quarterback of the New York Jets in 2001 and a New Yorker through and through is with us tonight. Please welcome Vinny Testaverde. So, the decision is made to cancel the games for that week, which I know you felt was the right choice. And 3 days later, it's Saturday, and you were down here. Can you tell our audience that story?
Yes, last time I was down here was 17 years ago, and is quite a bit different today, thank God. I was asked by a friend through the police commissioner to come down to visit Ground Zero, more importantly to visit with the rescue workers who were working tirelessly trying to find some survivors. We were the only car on the road. The bulldozers were blocking the entrance to Ground Zero. We entered Ground Zero with a formation of military surrounding with assault rifles. It was quite a sight, something that I'll never forget. I wish I never had seen it, but it was a tough time for our country, but at the end, looking back, years later, I know we made the right decision not to play the games on that Sunday.
There's a photo. Can we show the photo to the folks? The photo with the rock. What are your recollections of that?
Well, on the way out, leaving Ground Zero, on the way home, I saw a little rock or a stone on the ground. I just wanted something to remember the events of what I experienced. One, that what can take place if we let our guard down. And now looking back, two, what we can do with our resilience and rebuilding and coming back.
The NFL was not the only league to cancel its events. Of course, the impact of the attacks extended well beyond New York. On the evening of September 11th, one of our nation's most popular teams ever, the U.S. women's national soccer team, reigning World Cup champions, were in Columbus, Ohio, competing against some of the top teams in the world.
We were scheduled to play Japan that night, and I was rooming with Heather Mitz. I think we had like 9 a.m. breakfast, and we woke up, and we turned the TV on, of course, as you do in the morning, and all of a sudden, the news is flashing. We sat there on the edge of our bed watching it all. Heather and I looked at each other and were like, what is going on?
I'm used to playing against these incredible international opponents who, in a tournament, you collectively don't like. That day, it didn't exist, and the elevators, every time it opened on the floor that the Japan team was staying on, the look of compassion on their face, it was a collective, like, I'm so sorry.
When we were told that we weren't going to play the official games with Japan, but we were going to do a condensed scrimmage with them, clearly it was not something that was a focus for us.
Probably the worst soccer from both teams we've ever had as a country, and same for Japan, but instead of that spirit of competitiveness that is always around every single tournament, it was a spirit of compassion.
There was an electricity to games that pre-9/11 we didn't have, and we felt was this great opportunity to remind America why America is so great. In our biggest tragedies in this country, the silver lining is we come together as a nation, and you could feel it on the field when you were playing. You could feel it from the stands, and as players, it was almost this extra responsibility
That's what they got going on.
This was something that was felt from the country. Take us back to that day. Take us back to Columbus, Ohio, the hotel that day.
That day changed the world, y'all. September 11th forever changed the world. Supposedly Patriots Day. Yeah, you know. If it wasn't for that day, Homeland Security Department wouldn't have been necessary. But it was, Homeland Security has its benefits, so, you know. Christian Nielsen, I'm not coming for you. I'm leaving you alone, lady. Unlike the dumbass in chief, you actually know policy. You actually know some shit, you know what I mean? So, yeah, I'm not coming for your department, man. Okay?
Sports would not be canceled indefinitely, and the role that sports would play in the days and weeks that followed would never be more impactful.
Speaking of black powerness, has there been a better rendition of America the Beautiful than Ray Charles' rendition again to the World Series? Come on, yo. Look at my boy W. Everybody's supposedly loving on Judge Bush right now. Yo, regional village idiot. On a different level, you know.
You want leaders. Just really, really calm.
So, not quite sure what was going on there with that ESPN programming, but here goes. Wired magazine had this beautiful piece on Bob Mueller, the real life Jack McCoy. If you're a Law and Order fan, if you're a fan of Law and Order like I am, Jack McCoy, I think, was modeled after Robert Mueller. So this was a Wired magazine issue from June of this year, June 2018, and on the cover it has The Making of Robert Mueller by Garrett M. Graff. The untold story of the special counsel's time in combat and how it prepared him to take on the digital saboteurs of American democracy, or the theft of American democracy, of true Americanism, with the help and assistance of the occupiers of now three branches of the government. You know, that's neither here nor there. It's on page 84. Let me see. Let's go to page 84 here. Go to page 84. Where we at? Nice. And they got an awesome ass. Look at that. And it has dog tags that read Mueller Robert S. Special Counsel, U.S. DOJ. Call of Duty. Robert Mueller's job is to make sense of how Russia hacked the 2016 election. But to make sense of Mueller, you have to revisit some of the bloodiest battles of Vietnam. By Garrett M. Graff, spelled Graff. One day in the summer of 1969, a young Marine lieutenant named Bob Mueller arrived in Hawaii for a rendezvous with his wife Anne. She was flying in from the East Coast with the couple's infant daughter Cynthia, a child Mueller had never met. Mueller had taken a plane from Vietnam. After 9 months at war, he was finally due for a few short days of R&R outside the battle zone. Mueller had seen intense battles since he last said goodbye to his wife. He'd received the Bronze Star with the distinction for valor for his actions in one battle, and he'd been airlifted out of the jungle during another firefight after being shot in the thigh. He and Anne had spoken only twice since he'd left for South Vietnam. Despite all that, Mueller confessed to her in Hawaii that he was thinking of extending his deployment for another 6 months and maybe even making a career in the Marines. Anna was understandably ill at ease about the prospect, but as it turned out, she wouldn't be a Marine wife for much longer. It was standard practice for Marines to be rotated out of combat, and later that year, Mueller found himself assigned to a desk job in Marine headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. There, he discovered something about himself. I didn't relish the U.S. Marine Corps absent combat. I didn't relish the U.S. Marine Corps absent combat. So he headed to law school with the goal of serving his country as a prosecutor. He went on to hold high positions in 5 presidential administrations. He led the criminal justice he led the criminal division of the Justice Department, overseeing the U.S. investigation of the Lockerbie bombing and the federal prosecution of the Gambino crime family boss John Gotti. He became director of the FBI 1 week before September 11, 2001, and stayed on to become the Bureau's longest-serving director since J. Edgar Hoover. Before, you see, this is something that I'm conscious of. I knew of, especially growing up in the DMV, growing up in Maryland. 17 years ago, I was in the 10th grade, you know what I mean? So, and if you think I read now, yeah. See, back then I read, I watched the news, I followed damn near everything, you know what I mean? And I was going to school then, I was in high school, so I, I, I had conversations and debates with people about what was going on then in context with what was in the past, you know what I mean? So Bob Mueller had some kind of surgery operation scheduled, something around his confirmation or the timing that when he needed to step into the position of as director of the FBI, they had to give him like a month or so or a month and a half grace period so he can recover from a surgery he just had. That's how great this man is. So when you hear all these people talk about Bob Mueller, this is that, he's an American, he's bullshit. They're them the same people who respect this man. The only reason they say that right now because they're trying to expose this poster boy for bigots that we have in office right now. That's all that is, yeah. But I digress. I had to throw my little two cents in there. It's not really American 2 cents, it's more African 2 cents, you know what I mean? But I had to throw it in there anyway. He became director of the FBI 1 week before September 11, 2001, and stayed on to become the Bureau's longest-serving director since J. Edgar Hoover. And yet, throughout his 5-decade career, that year of combat experience with the Marines has loomed large in Mueller's mind. I'm most proud the Marine Corps deemed me worthy of leading other Marines, he told me in a 2009 interview. Today, the face-to-face between Special Counsel Robert Mueller and President Donald Trump stands out. I can't believe I gotta call this motherfucker president, yo. But today, the face-off between Special Counsel Robert Mueller and you know who, the one who shall not be named. Thank you, JK. Today, the face-off between Special Counsel Robert Mueller and the one who shall not be named stands out amid the black comedy of Trump's Washington as an epic tale of divergent American elite. A story of two men, born just 2 years apart, raised in similar wealthy backgrounds in northeastern cities, both deeply influenced by their fathers, both star prep school athletes, both Ivy League educated, who now find themselves playing very different roles in a riveting national drama about political corruption and Russia's interference in the 2016 election. The two men have lived their lives in pursuit of almost diametrically opposed goals. Mueller, a life of patrician public service, Trump, a life of private profit. Okay. The two men have lived their lives in pursuit of almost diametrically opposed goals. Mueller, a life of patrician public service, Trump, a life of private profit. And that's a guy you supposedly wanted to make America great again. I love the genius of racist white Americans. 62 million of them who voted for his dumbass. Those divergent paths began with Vietnam, the conflict that tore the country apart just as both men graduated from college in the 1960s. Despite having been educated at an elite private military academy, Donald Trump famously drew 5 draft deferments, including one for bone spurs in his feet. He would later joke repeatedly that his success at avoiding sexually transmitted diseases while dating numerous women in the 80s was my personal Vietnam. I feel like a great and a very brave soldier. Alright, now the first time I read this, I wasn't sure if it was Garrett Graff who did it this way to highlight Trump's stupidity or his lack of knowing how to spell simple basic English words. But then when I looked into it, I realized that this was something that Trump himself has said and wrote and pronounced it this way. He said he felt like he would later joke repeatedly that his success, namely America's first white president. Thank you, Ta-Nehisi. His success at avoiding STDs while dating numerous women. Okay, you know what? Let me rephrase that. This is the way I'm about to say it now. It's not how Garrett said it. It's how Alpha's saying it. Trump will later joke that repeatedly that his success at avoiding STDs while raping numerous women in the 80s was his personal Vietnam. He felt like a great and a very brave soldier, not soldier, not SOLDIER, soldier, SOLIDER. That's your president. You too, Kanye. You too, Wayne. You too, Tom Brady. I ain't forget about you, Tommy Terrific. Mueller, for his part, not only volunteered for the Marines, he spent a year waiting for an injured knee to heal so he could serve. Just like he has spent a year waiting for him to recover from his surgery to be the second longest serving FBI bureau in history. You know, he waited. What about Mueller, for his part, not only volunteered for the Marines, he spent a year waiting for an injured knee to heal so he could serve. And he has said very little about his time in Vietnam over the years. When he was leading the FBI through the catastrophe of 9/11 and its aftermath, he would brush off the crushing stress saying, "I'm getting a lot more sleep now than I ever did in Vietnam." One of the only other times his staff at the FBI ever heard him mention his Marine service was on a flight home from an official international trip. They were watching We Were Soldiers, a 2002 film starring Mel Gibson about some of the early battles in Vietnam. Mueller glanced at the screen and observed, "Pretty accurate." His reticence is not unusual for the generation that served on the front lines of a war that the country never really embraced. Many of the veterans I spoke with for this story said they'd avoided talking about Vietnam until recently. Joe Burgos, Burgos, who served as a corporal with Mueller, told me at the end of our hour-long conversation, "I've never told anyone most of this. Yet from almost all of them, Mueller included, Vietnam marked the primary formative experience of their lives." Nearly 50 years later, many Marine veterans who served in Mueller's unit have email addresses that reference their time in Southeast Asia. Gunny Sergeant, 2-4 Marine, Semper Fi, Platoon Corpsman, Grunt, One Marine's email handle even referenced Mother's Ridge, the area where Mueller first faced large-scale combat in December 1968. Almost 50 years ago. 50 years and 2 months ago, Robert Mueller right now. The guy, the guy, the most, the guy with the most Americanism in his bone right now. Since John McCain has passed, we're gonna get to him. May he rest in perfect peace, sir. The guy who absolutely is the most American of Americans right now, Bob Mueller, 50 years ago, 50 years and 2 months ago, was dealing with Mother's Ridge, the area where he first faced his large-scale battle and combat. While this president in office right now was on his way to perfecting the art of grabbing women's pussies. Get the fuck out of here. The Marines in Vietnam instilled in Mueller a sense of discipline and a relentlessness that have driven him ever since. He once told me that one of the things that the Marines taught him was to make his bed every day. I'd written a book about his time at the FBI and was by then familiar with his severe, straight-laced demeanor. So I laughed at the time and said, "That's the least surprising thing I've ever learned about you." But Mueller persisted. It was an important small daily gesture exemplifying follow through and execution. Once you think about it, do it, he told me. I've always made my bed and I've always saved, even in Vietnam in the jungle. You've put money in the bank in terms of discipline. Sound like that man got some sense. Talking about the witch hunts. Your face is a witch hunt, you dumbass. A Trump, trust me, bro. I know you're gonna tweet all kind of things about me, all kind of things about this shithole country I'm from, throw out all kind of stuff out there. I'm not tripping, bro. Honest to God, I'm expecting it. That's the reason why I feel like I can do this and get under your skins, because it's so, like, so thin you can't even feel it. But I digress. My mind went somewhere else, you know. I pulled a Kanye moment. You know what that feel like? Mueller's former Princeton classmate and FBI Chief of Staff, W. Lee Ross, recalled how Mueller's Marine leadership style carried through to the FBI, where he had little patience for subordinates who questioned his decisions. He expected his orders to be executed in the Hoover building just as they had been on the battlefield. In meetings with subordinates, Mueller had a habit of quoting Gene Hackman's gruff Navy submarine captain in the 1995 Cold War thriller Crimson Tide. We're here to preserve democracy, not to practice it. Discipline has certainly been a defining feature of Mueller's Russia investigation. In a political era of extreme TMI, marked by rampant White House leaks, Twitter tirades, and an administration that disgorges jilted cabinet-level officials as quickly as it can appoint new ones, the special counsel's office has been a locked door. Mueller has remained an impassive cipher, the stoic silent figure at the center of America's political gyre. I love that word, gyre, G-Y-R-E. Not once has he spoken publicly about the Russia investigation since he took the job in May of 2017, and his carefully chosen team of prosecutors and FBI agents has proved leak-proof even under the most intense of media spotlights. Mueller's spokesperson, Peter Carr, on loan from the Justice Department, has essentially had one thing to tell a media horde ravenous for information about the Russia investigation: no comment. If Mueller's discipline is reflected in the silence of his team, his relentlessness has been abundantly evident in the pace of indictments, arrests, and legal maneuvers coming out of his office. His investigation is proceeding on multiple fronts. He is digging into Russian information operations carried out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and other social media platforms. Hey, it's this game, right? It's this game called Trivia Crack. I know it's a lot of people who play it. I'm like one of the best trivia crack players out there. Like, I was so addicted to that game, but I haven't played it in so long. I even got rid of my phone. And the reason why I got rid of my phone, because I got to the point where I feel like, you know what, most of these questions is just, she wasn't fun anymore. It wasn't something I was looking forward to playing anymore. So I got rid of it. But before that though, like, I discovered the game in 2015. Between that time and till I got rid of it till the election in 2016, it was so many ads after every time, you know, when you play in the game where you lose or the game is over or your turn, you know how they have those ads come up. If you've played Trivia Crack in those years, 2015 and 2016, how many ads did you see that were asking you to rate Obama? And the picture it had of Obama when it was asking you not to rate it, it was his ears were elaborately elongated to portray a certain primate that, you know, that's always been associated with the black man. But you know how they do that. So, and it was this ad that always asked to like rate Obama, and most people didn't realize it was funded by Newsmax. And Newsmax, if you know who's who, Newsmax is worse than InfoWars and Breitbart. The only difference is Newsmax is not. Newsmax been around longer and they're not as social media crafty as Breitbart is, you know what I mean? But long story short though, you should check out, somebody should really look into the whole Trivia Crack and their ads and where the connection with it. I don't know if they're best in Peru or Chile, but I saw so many of those ads, man. I went back to the Google Play Store. I looked at what company is in charge of that ad and all that. Just, you know what I mean? My mind got nosy about them. I'm like, yo, do you have a political leaning for you to be putting out this many ads? Ain't no way I should be seeing 10 or 15 ads every time I play in this game every day asking me to rate the current president right now when he was already doing a great job. I get it. You know what I mean? Hearts and minds. You're trying to sow the right disinformation in people's hearts and minds. And I get it. So, but long story short, where was I? His investigation is proceeding on multiple fronts. He is digging into Russian information operations carried out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and other social media platforms. In February, his office indicted 13 people and 3 entities connected to the Internet Research Agency, the Russian organization that allegedly masterminded the information campaigns. He's also pursuing those responsible for cyber intrusions, including the hacking of the email system at the DNC. At the same time, Mueller's investigators are probing the business dealings of Trump and his associates, an effort that has yielded indictments of tax fraud and conspiracy against Trump's former campaign chair Paul Manafort, and a guilty plea on financial fraud and lying to investigators by Manafort's deputy Rick Gates. The team is also looking into the numerous contacts between Trump's people and Kremlin-connected figures. And Mueller is questioning witnesses in an effort to establish whether Trump has obstructed justice by trying to squash the investigation itself. Almost every week brings a surprise development in the investigation, but until the next indictment or arrest, it's difficult to say what Mueller knows or what he thinks. Before he became special counsel, Mueller freely and repeatedly told me that his habits of mind and character were most shaped by his time in Vietnam, a period that is also the the least explored chapter of his biography. Excuse me, world. This first in-depth account of his year at war is based on multiple interviews with Mueller about his time in combat, conducted before he became special counsel, as well as hundreds of pages of once classified Marine combat records, official accounts of Marine engagements, and the first ever interview with 8 Marines who served alongside Mueller in 1968 and 1969. They provided the best new window we have into the mind of the man leading the Russia investigation. Anyone who is still a Trump supporter, okay, all the racist Americans, did you know that right before May of 2017, Bob Mueller was gonna be the one that was gonna be director of the FBI, right? After the whole James Comey incident, or even before James Comey, he was gonna be. I think he was gonna be. Was he gonna be director of the FBI? I think he was gonna be director of the FBI or something. He was gonna have some position, but he had a meeting with Trump. I think it was a short little meeting, like 10-minute meeting or something, 15-minute meeting. He came out that meeting shaking his head. He like, yo, this man is a problem. I'm sure Trump probably asked him for a loyalty pledge or some shit. Like, who does that? That's that ignorant Russian Chinese shit. The fuck out of here with that. But I'm just saying, like, Bob Mueller is American to the bone, and everything he's doing with his investigation is 100% legit. It's 100% legal. It should go forward. It's not a witch hunt. It's not a partisan investigation. Far from it. Quite the contrary, actually, if you want to get technical, but that's neither here nor there. And I'm sure he's not going to disrupt anything. He's probably waiting for the right time so he can drop indictments on this great American thief whose thievery was even worse than Benedict Arnold's betrayal. He's waiting for the right time. Mueller is not trying to disrupt the flow of America's democracy. If anything, he's trying to preserve it. He's trying to keep us from having Mike Pence as president. Thank you, sir. If you can make sure Mike Pence never becomes president, man, I would name my 17th son Bob. Word of my mother. Be the first African named Bob. Mr. Graff goes on to say, Robert Swan Mueller III. Wow, I didn't know your middle name was Swan. That's what's up. What up, Swanee? Robert Swan Mueller III, the first of 5 children and the only son, grew up in a stately stone house in a wealthy Philadelphia suburb. His father was a DuPont executive who had captained a Navy submarine chaser in World War II. He expected his children to abide by a strict moral code. A lie was the worst sin, Mueller said. The other thing you didn't do was to give anything less than the truth to my mother and father. He attended St. Paul's Preparatory School in Concord, New Hampshire, where the all-boys class emphasized Episcopal ideals of virtue and manliness. He was a star on the lacrosse squad and played hockey with future U.S. Senator John Kerry on the school team. For college, he chose his father's alma mater, Princeton, and entered the class of 1966. Kennedy had been killed already. King was still alive. Robert Kennedy was still alive. So, okay. Malcolm X had been killed already. Okay. For college, he chose his father's alma mater, Princeton, and entered the class of 1968. The expanding war in Vietnam was a frequent topic of conversation among the elite students who spoke of the war, echoing earlier generations in terms of duty and service. Princeton from 1962 to 66 was a completely different world than 67 onward, said Rawls, a lifelong friend of Mueller's. The anti-Vietnam movement was not on us yet. A year or two later, the campus was transformed. On the lacrosse field, Mueller met David Hackett, a classmate and athlete who would profoundly affect Mueller's life. Hackett had already enlisted in the Marines version of ROTC, spending his Princeton summers training for the escalating war. I, I had one of the finest role models I could have asked for in an upperclassman by the name of David Hackett, Mueller recalled in the 2013 speech as FBI director. David was on our 1965 lacrosse team. He was not necessarily the best on the team, but he was a determined and natural leader. After he graduated in 1965, David Hackett began training to be a Marine, earning top honors in his officer candidate class. After that, he shipped out to Vietnam. In Mueller's eyes, Hackett was a shining example. Mueller decided that when he graduated the following year, he too would enlist in the Marines. On April 30th, 1967, shortly after Hackett had signed up for his second tour in Vietnam, his unit was ambushed by more than 75 camouflaged North Vietnamese troops who were firing down from bunkers with weapons that included a 50 caliber machine gun. According to a Marine history, dozens of Marines were killed or wounded within minutes. Hackett located the source of the incoming fire and charged 30 yards across open ground to an American machine gun team to tell them where to shoot. Minutes later, as he was moving to help direct a neighboring platoon whose commander had been wounded, he was killed by a sniper. Posthumously awarded the Silver Star, Hackett's commendation explained that he died while pressing the assault and encouraging his Marines. By the time word of Hackett's death filtered back to the U.S., Mueller was already making good on his pledge to follow him into military service. The news only strengthened his resolve to become an infantry officer. One would have thought that the life of a Marine and David's death in Vietnam would argue strongly against following in his footsteps, Mueller said in their 2013 speech. But many of us saw in him the person we wanted to be. Even before his death, he was a leader and a role model on the fields of Princeton. He was a leader and a role model on the fields of battle as well. And a number of his friends and classmates joined the Marine Corps because of him, as did I. In mid-1966, Mueller underwent his military physical at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. This was before the draft lottery began and before Vietnam became a divisive cultural watershed. He recalls sitting in the waiting room as another candidate, a strapping 6-foot, 280-pound lineman for the Philadelphia Eagles was ruled 4F, medically unfit for military service. After that, it was Mueller's turn to be rejected. His years of intense athletics, including hockey and lacrosse, had left him with an injured knee. The military declared that it would need to heal before he would be allowed to deploy. In the meantime, he married Ann Cable Standish, a graduate of Miss Porter School and Sarah Lawrence, over Labor Day weekend 1966. Oh, y'all been married for 52 years. That is awesome, yo. Our generation ain't gonna have that, yo, sadly. I hate to say it, like, I'm part of a problem. I myself is part of that generation, but our generation is sadly not gonna have that. Relationships that last 4 or 5 decades, yo. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. That is awesome, though. I'm sorry. That was just so awesome. Hey, what's his name? Michael Douglas's father, Kirk Douglas, literally wrote this awesome ass poem about romance. I think it was 2008 or 2009. It was on Huffington Post. Check it out. Awesome. In the meantime, he married Ann Cabell Standish, a graduate of Miss Porter School and Sarah Lawrence, over Labor Day weekend 1966. And they moved to New York, where he earned a master's degree in international relations at New York University. Once his knee had healed, Mueller went back to the military doctors. In 1967, just before Donald Trump received his own medical deferment for heel spurs. How'd you get your heel spurs, man? Your foot got stuck in some dirty pussy? That's how? Because at that time you was probably using your foot, you know what I mean? Since you probably don't know much about the female anatomy. You rapist of a racist. The fuck out of here. I'm sorry, y'all. I can't help it. I told you I'm suffering through PTSD. That motherfucker is a problem. Yeah, I don't even know. This guy is a problem, but he's a sign. In addition to the problem that he is a sign for people to wake the fuck up. For black folks to stop blaming Obama for shit Obama got nothing to do with. Let me break down some numbers to y'all real quick. Hold on. Alright. This is for everybody of color who got something bad to say about Obama, who for the 8 years he was there, if you voted for him twice, it's all fine and dandy. It wasn't enough. Let me tell you, let me break down this number to you right now that gonna have you thinking and realize that, yeah, we ain't do shit for that man compared to how much that man tried to do for us. In 8 years, 2 terms, he had a full Congress for 4 months. Bro, man, from the 5th floor. 8 years. He had a full Congress for 4 months. That's when Obamacare was passed. So people that open their mouth and say, oh, he forced through Obamacare without no Republican. Yes, because the man had 4 months of a Congress to work with. But that's just the African in me speaking though, you know. Americans of African descent that sees a distinction between that was for you. In 8 years, 4 months, think about it. In the last 8 years right now, if you're an adult, in the last 8 years right now, if you've only had sex for 4 months in the last 8 years, think about how backed up you will be. Put it in that context, you know what I mean? If he had some 7 years and 8 months ago, that's a problem, right? So put it in that context. In 8 years, Obama had a full Congress for 4 months. 4 freaking months he had a full Congress, and we talk about that. That man didn't do shit for us. Get the fuck out of here with that. Once his knee had healed, Mueller went back to the military doctors. In 1969, just before Donald Trump received his own medical deferment for heel spurs, Mueller started officer candidate school at Quantico, Virginia. And this is the guy you call an American on a witch hunt? Like Hackett before him, Mueller was a star in his officer candidate school training class. He was a cut above Ricardo Kellogg, who had followed one of his fraternity brothers into the Marines after graduating from the College of Santa Fe in New Mexico. Kellogg, who went through training with Mueller, remembers Mueller racing another candidate on an obstacle course and losing. It's the only time he can remember Mueller being bested. He was a natural athlete and a natural student. I don't think he had a hard day at OCS, to be honest. There was, it turned out, only one thing he was bad at, and it was a feeling that would become familiar to legions of his subordinates in the decades to come. He received a D in delegation. During the time Mueller spent in training from November 1967 through July 1968, the context of the Vietnam War changed dramatically. The Bloody Tet Offensive, a series of coordinated widespread surprise attacks across South Vietnam by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese in January 1968, stunned America, and with public opinion souring on the conflict, Lyndon Johnson declared he wouldn't run for re-election. As Mueller's training class graduated, Walter Cronkite declared on the CBS Evening News that the war could not be won, for it seems now more certain than ever. Cronkite told his million of viewers on February 27, 1968, that the bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate. The country seemed to be descending into chaos as the spring unfolded. Both Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy were assassinated. Cities erupted into riots. Anti-war protests raged. But the shifting tide of public opinion and civil unrest barely registered with the officer candidates in Mueller's class. I don't remember anyone having qualms about where we were or what we were doing, Kellogg said. That spring, as Donald Trump graduated from the University of Pennsylvania and began working for his father's real estate company, Mueller finished up officer candidate school and received his next assignment. He was to attend the United States Army's Ranger School. Mueller knew that only the best young officers went into Ranger training, a strenuous 8 weeks advanced skills and leadership program for the military's elite at Fort Benning, Georgia. He would be spending weeks practicing patrol tactics, assassination missions, attack strategies, and ambushes staged in swamps. But the implications of the assignment was also sobering to the newly minted officers. Many Marines who passed the course were designated as recon Marines in Vietnam, a job that often came with a life expectancy measured in weeks. Mueller credits the training he received at Ranger School for his survival in Vietnam. The instructors there had been through jungle combat themselves, and their stories from the front lines taught the candidates how to avoid numerous mistakes. Ranger trainees often had to function on just 2 hours of rest at night and a single daily meal. Ranger school more than anything teaches you about how you react with no sleep and nothing to eat, Mueller told me. You learn who you want on point and who you don't want anywhere near point. After Ranger school, he also attended Airborne School, aka Jump School, where he learned to be a parachutist. By the fall of 1968, he was on his way to Asia. He boarded a flight from Travis Air Force Base in California to an embarkation point in Okinawa, Japan, where there was an almost palpable current of dread among the deploying troops. From Okinawa, Mueller headed to Dong Ha Combat Base near the so-called demilitarized zone, the dividing line between North and South Vietnam, established after the collapse of the French colonial regime in 1954. Mueller was determined and well-trained, but he was also afraid. You were scared to death of the unknown, he says. More afraid in some ways of failure than death. More afraid of being found wanting. That kind of fear, he says, animates your unconscious. For American troops, 1968 was the deadliest year of the war, as they beat back the Tet Offensive and fought the Battle of Huey. All told, 16,592 Americans were killed that year, roughly 30% of total U.S. fatalities in the war. Over the course of the conflict, more than 50,000 Americans died, 300,000 were wounded, and some 2 million South and North Vietnamese died. Just 18 months after David Hackett was felled by a sniper, Mueller was being sent to the same region as his officer training classmate Kellogg, who had arrived in Vietnam 3 months earlier. Mueller was assigned to H Company, hotel company in Marine parlance, part of the 2nd Battalion of the 4th Marine Regiment, a storied infantry unit that traces its origins back to the 1930s. The regiment had been fighting almost non-stop in Vietnam since May of 1965. Damn! Earning the nickname the Magnificent Bastards. Ah. You think that's probably where Quentin Tarantino got the idea to call the Inglorious Bastards? I know it's not the same story, but you know, yeah. I digress. Just 18 months after David Hackett was felled by a sniper, Mueller was being sent to the same region as his officer training classmate Kellogg, who had arrived in Vietnam 3 months earlier. Mueller was assigned to H Company, hotel company in Marine parlance, part of the 2nd Battalion of the 4th Marine Regiment, a storied infantry unit that traced its origins back to the 1930s. The regiment had been fighting almost non-stop in Vietnam since May 1965, earning the nickname the Magnificent Bastards. The grueling combat took its toll. In the fall of 1967, 6 weeks of battle reduced the battalion's 956 Marines to just 300 fit for duty. Wow. Wow. During the Tet Offensive, the 2nd Battalion had seen bitter and bloody fighting that never let up. In April 1968, it fought in the Battle of Dai Do, a days-long engagement that killed nearly 600 North Vietnamese soldiers. 80 members of the 2nd Battalion died in the fight, and 256 were wounded. David Harris, who arrived in Vietnam in May, joined the depleted units just after Dai Do. Hotel Company and all of 2 Forward was decimated, he says. There were a skeleton crew. They were haggard. They were beat to death. It was just pitiful. By the time Mueller was set to arrive 6 months later, the unit had rebuilt its ranks as its wounded Marines recovered and filtered back into the field. They had been tested and emerged stronger. By coincidence, Mueller was to inherit leadership of a hotel company platoon from his friend Kellogg. Those kids that I had and Bob had, half of them were veterans of Dai Do, Kellogg says. They were field sharp.